Thank you so much for joining us for the launch of the 6th issue of Blue Security's Maritime Affairs, Coordinating for Maritime Security, Southeast Asia's Evolving Institutions. I'm Kate Clayton, a senior researcher in programs and senior coordinator at Trobe Asia and Blue Security. Before we begin, Blue Security and Trobe Asia would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Barong Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners on the lands on which I'm hosting the event here today, and I pay our respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. The Blue Security program engages with and facilitates high-quality research on issues of critical maritime security across the Indo-Pacific, bringing together regional experts in politics, international law, strategic studies. Blue Security focuses on 3 key pillars of maritime security. Those are order, law, and power. And this edition of Maritime Affairs really encapsulates that whole of government perception of maritime security that many of us have. The edition was authored by Dharma Agastia, Kasira Cheeppensook, Scott Edwards, as well as me, Fabe, who are all joining us today and will tell us more about their fantastic and comprehensive paper, Mapping Maritime Institutions across Thailand, Indonesia, as well as the Philippines. To learn more about our authors, you can check out their bios in our publication. So today's event is in collaboration with the Yokosuka Council on Asia-Pacific Affairs, and we're now joined by Jeffrey Mazziota, who will tell us more about YCAPS. Over to you, Jeff.
Can you hear me by chance?
Yes, perfect.
All right, great. Apologies. I was having a little bit of trouble with my microphone. But yeah, so I'm Jeff Mazziata. I serve as the activities coordinator with YCAPS, the Yokosuka Council on Asia Pacific Studies. So first, I just want to say how excited we are at YCAPS to co-host this event, how impressed we are with Scott and his team. A little bit about YCAPS, though. So we support individuals' professional development and encourage the development of communities by promoting the study of strategic, diplomatic, and legal issues affecting the Asia-Pacific region. Of course, we are a volunteer-led nonprofit organization. So our activities include seminars, webinars like this, field trips, conferences, workshops, and development of support networks. Of course, we operate across Japan, but we mostly focus on base hosting communities. So I just like to thank everyone for giving me the time to talk about YCAPS and say, please follow us on Facebook or check out ycaps.org to know about our future events. And I'll share some links in the chat later about some of those upcoming activities. And thank you. I appreciate it. We're excited for today.
Thank you so much for that one, Jeff. And apologies for any issues with the chat earlier. You should be able to use the chat now. And please feel free to use this as an interactive resource to share any links, any issues that might be of interest to our speakers. So I'm going to skip straight ahead to the paper. So I'm going to start with you, Scott. I was wondering if you could unpack the overall rationale and the ideas behind the paper.
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. Good morning here. Sorry if I'm still seem a bit sleepy. It's 4 a.m. in the UK, but hopefully can unpack this relatively straightforward. And in terms of the paper, I guess the kind of overarching rationale is that, when we consider the kind of importance of the seas to Southeast Asia and the kind of really complex and diverse threat domain that the seas face at the moment, we talk a lot about the need to bring different actors together. I think kind of anyone working within the maritime security space, particularly in Southeast Asia, but also I think globally, we're having these conversations fairly often, like how do we align different actors? How do we get different actors working together in the kind of holistic provision of maritime security? And I think, so this was the kind of starting point for the paper. The region's maritime security agenda, I think, is increasingly broad. It's increasingly complex in terms of its breadth. There's kind of various issues that the region's facing, which sure most of the audience know about, so I don't want to go into too much depth in these, but the kind of criminality at sea being a particular issue, the rise of kind of various forms of human trafficking and irregular migration and things like that, the way that actors are using the oceans to transport goods and people. ranging to threats, kind of more direct threats like piracy or armed robbery at sea and maritime terrorism and things like that. So we see this kind of breadth of maritime security issues on the agenda itself. But also, you know, the thing that kind of unites these issues, I guess, or the kind of thing that bring these issues together is their complexity, right? Like all of these issues are very different. There's like so many different kind of dynamics within them, but they're all kind of equally complex. If you think about the oceans and the problems of like jurisdictionality, for example, the kind of the fact that most of these kind of threats cross some sort of boundaries, whether those are kind of domestic or international, but having very different jurisdictions depending on where these kind of activities or these threats come from. A lot of these threats are extremely liminal as well. They don't just kind of implicate the oceans. Quite often, the threats themselves are more of a symptom of what's happening on land, right? So it kind of incorporates both actors at land and sea as well. And I think kind of one of the larger considerations as well when thinking about the kind of complexity of the threats that the region's facing is that they very much are muddying that kind of traditional, non-traditional security. So divide, right? We've tended in the past, I think problematically generally, but to kind of put issues into different boxes. It's either a traditional security issue or it's a non-traditional security issue. And I think in the maritime security domain within the region, that this line is kind of increasingly muddy. You know, the most obvious case to this, I guess, is are you fishing, illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, where much of this is undertaken by non-state actors. But we've also seen intersection with kind of traditional security issues because IU fishing is being kind of weaponized and being used by like state-based actors as well. If we think about China's mobilization of the maritime militia, for example. I think another example of this would be the rise in dark shipping, you know, Russia in particular, as it starts to kind of launder its sanctioned oils and gas into the global supply chain, most often through kind of illicit ship-to-ship transfers, trying to hide where the vessels are, posing a threat to kind of navigation and environment. So I think there we see this kind of increasingly complex domain and this increasingly kind of complex space in which different actors are having to kind of operate. And I think because of this, and because of that kind of underlying importance of the oceans, therefore, there's the need to kind of secure these spaces in a more holistic or what's kind of usually termed at the moment like a whole of government manner, right? We need to kind of orient different actors together because they're cross-sectoral, because they're liminal, because they take place across all these kind of different boundaries. Then it implicates a whole range of government institutions and departments. And quite often, these are kind of ministries or departments that we don't kind of traditionally think about when we think about maritime security provision. And they might be departments and agencies that don't necessarily see themselves as kind of maritime security actors as well. You know, you have the kind of more obvious actors like navies and coast guards, but you also have like terrestrial-based police, environmental agencies, labor agencies, all these different actors that have to be kind of brought together. And it's kind of like moving then. So that's the kind of problem or the puzzle that we kind of wanted to look into in this paper, because what's kind of resulted is this need to organize very different actors, some of whom have kind of really different understandings and priorities when it comes to the kind of maritime domain, have kind of very different stakeholders at their core or different kind of reference to security, I guess, from this whole host of interconnected threats. And I think this isn't an easy task, right? And I think this is something that's kind of intuitively difficult, you know, like enhancing kind of coordination, ensuring these agencies are kind of interoperable and able to work together given their diversity, it is really important to kind of face this issue holistically, to kind of ensure there's not a lot of duplication, ensure there's some form of kind of common understanding about what the goal is, and try and minimize some of the potential kind of contradictions and tensions that there might be in understandings as well. Essentially, these individual agencies in themselves, there's no one individual agency that can respond to all of these issues and all the kind of complex dynamics that these kind of issues engender. And what we've kind of seen in response to this in the region and outside of the region as well, but I think the region is particularly interesting because there's a degree of maturity in these institutions. But what we've seen is a proliferation of different kind of agencies or governmental structures that do aim to kind of enhance coordination and do kind of try to bring these different actors together. That's kind of part of their remit. And today, and in the paper, we kind of focus on Indonesia's Pamela, the Philippines, the National Coast Watch Center, which I believe is rebranding or we're in that process of changing slightly, and Thailand's Maritime Enforcement Command Center. That there are other institutions that we didn't have chance to look at, but to give an idea of their kind of spread across the region, like Singapore has its Maritime Crisis Center, Brunei has the National Maritime Coordination Center as well. Malaysia seems to be in an ever ongoing process of trying to establish some sort of kind of coordinating body as well. What we've seen is then these kind of institutions, they might have other remits, they might have other functions. Some of them might be traditional, a bit more responsible, sorry, for kind of more traditional Coast Guard functions and things like that as well. But they also address this kind of interagency coordination. And I think for us, or at least I don't want to talk for anyone else, but I think for me, this was kind of really interesting, right? Because, intuitively, we can think about the challenges that they might face, but actually, the thing that kind of surprised me is there's been very little analysis of these as distinct actors within the kind of maritime security domain. There's a tendency to focus in on the navies or the coast guards when doing analysis of how to provide maritime security. There's a kind of focus on some of the individual agencies, but there's only a kind of emergent focus, I guess, on the kind of coordinating bodies and what it is that they're doing. And I think for me, this omission in analysis was kind of really problematic because the function of coordination is just such an interesting and difficult one, right? Like there's so many kind of different questions that coordination brings up, kind of goes beyond just that problem solving, but it becomes very relational about how they actually engage in this process of kind of bringing actors together through some sort of centralized institution and bureaucracy. It kind of implies these kind of very distinct political, social, and material challenges that other actors within the maritime security domain might not necessarily face. So I guess this is quite a long way of saying then, but the intention and the rationale was to just really focus in on how these essential actors, these increasingly important actors are actually doing, like how are they doing in bringing different agencies and departments together? How well are they kind of responding to this essential task that they've been given? Because I think as we see in the talk and see in the paper, hopefully you'll go and have a look at this, despite having very similar functions, that there's a lot of difference as well in how these agencies are kind of operating in each of their national contexts. They have kind of different regulatory bases, they have different degrees of independence and institutional structures that they've kind of reached different degrees of maturity. So there's a lot of kind of variation there as well. And I think in the paper, then what we ultimately set out to do is both identify the kind of implications of this difference and kind of look at the agencies in of themselves, but also try and look at some of the kind of common problems that might arise or some of those common kind of issues in the processes, whether that's kind of problems of legitimacy, authority, and problem solving, but ultimately to try and pinpoint what's worked well where, why has it worked well, why has it not worked well, and hopefully kind of just begin this process at least of analyzing how well this coordination is going and what needs to happen next potentially. So that's me. Thank you. Hope that was okay time-wise, and
Yeah.
I will hand it.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that one, Scott. And I think what your remarks really highlighted is that there hasn't really been any comprehensive study or mapping of these institutions per se that we talk about when we think about maritime security, talk about the Navy, Defense Forces, police, coast watchers, but it really is the kind of on the ground work of these maritime security institutions that do a lot of the legwork and the groundwork in how do we manage maritime security from a practical base and managing all of the bureaucratic issues that those interagencies face. So we'll now go into a little bit of a deep dive of the three agencies that this paper studies. So I'll start with you, Dharma, looking at the Indonesian Maritime Security Agency.
All right, thank you, Kate. So my part in the paper was wrote about the Bakamla, or the Indonesian Maritime Security Agency, and I've been asked to talk about the structure, the mandates, the activities, its capacity, its successes, and current challenges. So probably going to start with the structure. For those of you who are not familiar with what the Bakamla is, it is a non-ministerial organization which answers straight to the president of Indonesia through the Coordinating Ministry of Political, Security, and Legal Affairs, or that's quite a mouthful. So I'll just say it's called the Kemenkopolhukam, which I think is also a mouthful. Either way, the organization itself is headed by a Navy Vice Admiral, and although it is headed by a senior Navy official, it is primarily civilian in nature. Its personnel are mostly civilians, but the fact that it has a Navy leadership, some might want to call it a quasi-civilian or a semi-civilian organization. The Bakamla itself was created by mandate of the so-called Maritime Affairs Law. That's law number 32, released in 2014, which specifically mandates the creation of the Bakamla with the following duties, which include a policy formulation, operation of a maritime early warning system to coordinate patrols, and to provide assistance to other agencies with remit in the maritime domain. And to do that job, the Bakamla so far is equipped with the 32 offshore patrol vessels, around 1,200 personnel, with around 940 of those personnel are native to Bakamla, and the rest are seconded from other maritime security agencies, with chiefly the Navy and the police. As of last year, I think, the Bakamla's budget was around 50 million US dollars. 2/3 of that budget is for operations. And what are these operations that the Bakamla does is, although primarily the Bakamla's main responsibility is to coordinate other maritime security agencies within Indonesia. For context, that's around 12 of them, but only 5 or 6 have patrols, have the authority to conduct patrols because they have fleets. So essentially what the Bakamla does is they have to make up national patrol plans of not just for these agencies, but also for themselves. So the Bakamla faces a sort of a two duties at once. That is, they have to coordinate joint patrols, and at the same time they have to conduct their own patrols. So on top of these duties, on top of these coordination duties, what the Bakamla also does is that it manages information sharing, and it also conducts regular interagency briefings, while at the same time also formulating national policy in terms of maritime security. So what the Bakamla has to do that, what the Bakamla has right now is that they operate the so-called in the Indonesian Maritime Information Center, or IMIC, and that sort of provides open access data on what they call maritime vulnerabilities, which include the things like maritime crime, vessel collisions, and natural disasters. So about the successes of the Bakamla, I mean, from these activities, there are some successes. I'll just mention a few of them. One is that the Bakamla has successfully sort of spearheaded the formation of the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum, which was very much an Indonesian initiative, and which marked in 2022. And operationally, at the domestic level, what the Bakamla has done is they have uncovered a human trafficking ring, if I'm not mistaken, which was while they were looking for illegal fishing, they uncovered a human trafficking ring that involved which involved forced labor among seafarers. At the same time, the Bakamla has also managed to garner a lot of executive support. It is widely supported by executives in Indonesia, and right now it is supposed to be the official Coast Guard. It is planned to be the official Coast Guard of Indonesia if things go well. Now, with all these successes, the Bakamla has also faced a number of challenges, which I'll summarize into 3 points. The first is obviously the Bakamla faces a lot of budgetary challenges. The current budget, $50 million US dollars, is not expected to increase, and it's a bit difficult for the Bakamla to conduct all of its supposed duties with the limited amount of finances that they have. And so they're also planning to expand their fleet, and that's why they have proposed an additional budget of, I think, around 4 trillion rupiah. I don't know how to convert that to US dollars, but 4 trillion rupiah to add more vessels to their fleet. But they're not getting that amount of money anytime soon. And their second problem is sort of speaks more to the organizational rifts or schisms that are happening within the Indonesian Maritime Security agencies, and that is the question of whether or not the Bakamla is the real Coast Guard, because there is another agency, Maritime Security Agency in Indonesia, called the Sea and Coast Guard Unit, which is under the Ministry of Transportation, and they are also called the Sea and Coast Guard Unit, and this sort of leads to confusion as to which one is the proper Coast Guard. Now, that organizational schism is set to be resolved after the coordinating Ministry for Maritime Affairs wanted to merge the Sea and Coast Guard Unit with Bakamla, but the details of the merger are still scarce, and I think only recently it's been decided that merger is going on, but we'll need to wait what the next administration says. So this actually, the debate of whether or not the Bakamla is the real Coast Guard has led to some turf battles between these agencies. And the third one, I think, another big challenge that the Bakamla faces is in terms of its mandate. And so far, the Bakamla, unlike other maritime security agencies, they do not have the power to investigate, to conduct investigations of crimes. They can only arrest, but they cannot investigate the crimes by themselves, which and they would have to defer to other institutions with the authority to do that. And so this sort of creates a bottleneck in the Bakamla's operational capacity, in that they are allowed to arrest, but then they would have in some cases, some of the suspected crimes in which the Bakamla apprehends, they are not processed by the other institutions because of whatever reason. So And there's also there's also some debate on whether or not the Bakamla should have this authority, because on the one hand, but if we give the Bakamla the power to investigate, then it might distract from its original coordination duties, and because it already has a lot on its plate. So if we're going to add one more responsibility to it, is it going to stretch it might stretch the Bakamla's resources way too thin. So there's also that issue of adding to its mandate. And so I think I've covered all the bases of the Bakamla. It is a very interesting, so to speak, institution to talk about, but I've only been given 8 minutes. I don't want to hog the time here, so I'm just gonna give the time back to Kate.
Yeah, thank you so much for that one, Dharma. I think one of the things that was the most interesting about all of these institutions is what they do with such minimal funds. Particularly, also, you've got Thailand and the Philippines who receive those grants from the United States, but Indonesia being the kind of coordinating lead of the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum, and what they've been able to do on such a small budget really kind of shows the tricky position they're in to manage such vast maritime areas in that interagency capacity. So we'll turn now to you, Mimi, if you could tell us more about the Philippines.
Pleasant good morning to everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Trobe Asia and Yokosuka Council for Asia Pacific Studies for this research project. I also thank Dr. Scott Edwards for his leadership for this research project. So the National Coast Watch Center, I will first discuss its organizational structure. Recently, last March 25, 2024, in an executive order number 57, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. renamed the National Coast Watch Center as the National Maritime Council. So in terms of organizational structure, you have the council, the secretariat, and the center. For the council, there are several government agencies that fall under it. You have the Department of National Defense, you have the Department of Agriculture, Department of Energy, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Department of Foreign Affairs, the Department of Finance, the Department of Interior and Local Government, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Justice, and the National Intelligence Coordinating Agency. In the Secretariat, it was recently renamed as Presidential Office for Maritime Concerns. It focuses on consultative, research, administrative, and technical services. For the center itself, the National Maritime Center, it is tasked to implement, coordinate maritime security operations. In terms of its mandate, it is to perform as the central interagency mechanism for a coordinated and coherent approach on maritime issues and maritime security operations in order to enhance governance of Philippine maritime and ocean interests. In terms of functions, it aims to gather and disseminate information on maritime security, maintain effective communication and information technology operations, to conduct maritime surveillance and response operations, to plan and evaluate activities, to coordinate cross-border and multinational maritime security operations, and to coordinate apprehended violators. Additionally, it is tasked to do periodic assessments, to conduct forums, workshops, seminars, and finally, it is tasked to do training activities and conduct information sharing with our allies in the areas of maritime domain awareness, capacity building, and in terms of capacity, it has 84 staff members that conduct training in search and rescue operations, aid to navigation, marine pollution, and maritime law enforcement. The agency had several successes. It exhibited excellent coordination on assertive transparency in the West Philippine Sea. It also provided assistance to municipalities to rationalize the municipal fisheries ordinances to reduce illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. The Council also has a very good research obligation, and that is the assisting the national strategy for exploration of critical minerals in accordance with the International Seabed Authority and UNCLOS, focusing on deep seabed mining. Now, the agency also faces several challenges. First, you have the IUU fishing and interstate relations, where China's maritime militia are fishing within the Philippine exclusive economic zone. Another is, like any massive interagency structure, it aims to enhance coordination, interoperability, and ensuring that the different stakeholders have a common understanding of maritime security operations. A recent development is the Chinese Coast Guard law named Regulations on Administrative Law Enforcement Procedure for Coast Guard Agencies, which expanded maritime law enforcement powers of the Chinese Coast Guard, covering areas of the West Philippine Sea where the Philippines has sovereign rights and jurisdiction. And finally, the council also tackled some non-traditional security threats. It helped coastal communities deal with climate change. Another point is that it helps in ensuring energy security in these communities by providing solar-powered central landing area for the Lagonoy Gulf, and also solar power for fish attracting lights and refrigerators to help fishermen store their fish catch. And the third is in terms of transnational organized crime and fisheries crime, the Philippine Coast Guard has a memorandum of agreement with the coastal barangay officers for them to report illegal wildlife trading and the smuggling of drugs, people, and contraband. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for that one, Mimi. And I like how you mentioned that a part of the role of the centre is to make sure that everyone has a similar understanding of what maritime security is. And I can imagine just that alone would be quite the task, depending on if you're looking from the police, looking from the more human security perspective, and the Navy. So again, these institutions do a lot of work with very few resources. So moving over to Thailand, I'd love to hear from you, Kasira.
Thank you very much, Kate. Thanks for having me here. And sorry you have to bear with my voice because I'm still recovering from a nasty cold with a coughing fit. So THAIMEC, or Thai Maritime Enforcement Command Center, the Thai name literally translates to Command Center to Protect National Maritime Interest. And the Thai acronym Sonchon actually can be read to mean arrows of the waters. I thought that might be interesting. So even though it reports to the PM, the Prime Minister, it's also heavily utilized Navy personnel. So it's a civilian organization, but of course, like maybe it might be similar to Bakamla that Dharma mentioned, that it's actually has like quite maybe a concern at the first that it was heavily influenced by this kind of militarized culture, but it's transitioning to become a fully civilian organization. So in the executive board, it is headed by the Prime Minister. It's flanked by actually the Chief of Naval Staff and of course the Navy Commander-in-Chief. So that it's in the executive board, but also they have other members of the board of directors that involve other maritime-related government departments such as fisheries, customs, labor protection, and welfare and marine police. So it in effect, THAIMEC is supposed to be this coordination center and brought these maritime-related actors together. So THAIMEC looked after Thai obligations under various international conventions, including international norms that Thailand subscribed to, such as sustainable development and human security, and to be a kind of coordination center, as I mentioned, for maritime-related affairs among different domestic agencies. Since THAIMEC also has regional bases, it has 3 regional bases. For example, the first base covers upper areas of Thai Bay, and so they would like kind of have a division of labor of the areas that they look after in that sense. It would also monitor and evaluate threats to maritime interest. Apart from that, the Thai National Security Plan actually bestowed additional responsibilities where THAIMEC is supposed to step up alongside with the National Security Council in areas such as research, innovations, and technology. So THAIMEC is actually quite new. It was just established in 2019, so now it's just only under 5 years kind of age. It's a small agency. It's understaffed, of course, in its early years. So as I mentioned, it has to borrow personnel from the Navy and also other agencies. But we have seen recently that the THAIMEC has learned and understood its role in safeguarding maritime national interests. And it tried to link the academic sector and civil society sector with the more military wing of maritime related affairs. So its successes, because it emphasized a lot on integration and coordination, it resulted in a lot of collaborative efforts for rapid response to incidents at sea. So THAIMEC is not a Coast Guard per se in its original sense, since that's the Thai Navy domain, like it owns that domain. So, but the THAIMEC has joined forces with Thai Navy in stopping crimes such as illegal oil smuggling, for example. And of course, it has been active in the search and rescue operation, for example, when it helped tourists on cruise who had heart attack in the middle of Thai Bay. And so they brought him ashore and he received medical care in time, for example. Its coordinating functions reach beyond domestic agencies at first intended, actually, because THAIMEC co-hosted Southeast Asia Maritime Law Enforcement Initiative, the SIMLE Commanders Forum with Joint U.S. Military Advisory Group Thailand, what we call this just MAC-Thai. And the key issues discussed involved key challenges other enforcement agencies face in ASEAN. So it tried to become a kind of coordinating activities even beyond the domestic agencies. I think that's the direction that it's taking as well. The challenges, of course, THAIMEC is a coordinating center for training and capacity building for maritime affairs, but it also is in the process of capacity building itself because it's a young organization, it's quite new. It still had to recruit civilian and instill sense of ownership of this organization, that this is THAIMEC, we are Sonchon, we're not part of the Navy, we're not actually under this like military, kind of like chain of command, actually. So they also have to build this kind of organizational identity, and that's still a work in progress. So there were actually talks last year of some structural changes because as of now, the borrowed personnel, especially from the Navy, they kind of wearing two hats at the same time. And sometimes it might create some confusion in the responsibilities or the domain or the kind of the scope that they have responsibilities in. So there were talks among the THAIMEC officials of the structural changes as well. And we also have a new prime minister now who's not ex-military. So it might be, I mean, this kind of changes, because it's just like 5 years in, it might be a positive sign that the organization is still evolving, but also indicates that the organization needs to find its clear direction in the, the maritime related affairs are actually traditionally in Thailand belong to the Navy and the Thai Marine Police for a very long time.
Thank you so much for that one, Carissa, and emphasizing the point that the THAIMEC is still only 5 years old and it's got quite a task in doing that transition away from police and the Navy and in towards a more civilian-based agency, quite similar to Indonesia's Maritime Security Agency. So that turns to you, Dharma. I was wondering if you could tell us more about some of the intra-ASEAN issues on maritime security and how they might be able to resolve through these domestic coordinating institutions that we've been talking about today.
Right. So when it comes to the intra-ASEAN maritime issues, I think there's a lot that needs to be covered. For the most part, what ASEAN considers as core maritime issues could be found in the ASEAN Maritime Outlook. But then the issue amongst ASEAN members is each member has its own prioritization of which issues they want to tackle first. Now, I think I'm not saying that this is representative of the region as a whole, but I'd like to focus on IAU fishing because that's I think that's an area where most ASEAN members might consider to be a pressing and also common point of departure when it comes to maritime when it comes to maritime security, because it sort of how do I say it? It affects their interests in more ways than one. So when it comes to these when it comes to IU fishing and these coordinating structures, the IU fishing in itself is a very complicated problem that doesn't necessarily uh that cannot be handled by a single agency. So at the domestic level, what these coordinating structures might contribute to is that they sort of pull together relevant government agencies to create a coordinated response to IU fishing. So again, if I were to go back to the Bakamla, one of the roles of the Bakamla is by doing coordinated patrols and by sharing information with other maritime security agencies. They are able to they would be able to sort of tackle ships that are conducting illegal fishing within their own area, while also at the same time uncovering sort of other related maritime crimes with IU fishing. Like one of the big problems surrounding IU fishing right now is the prevalence of called a dark fishing, where ships intentionally turn off their AIS, which makes them harder to track. And once you turn off your AIS, by being harder to track, that also sort of opens up a lot areas for other forms of crimes at sea, like for example, human trafficking. So what in this case, what the Bakamla does is it can coordinate with it shares intelligence or information with other domestic agencies to let them know that, hey, there are vessels in this area that are turning off their AIS. Maybe you can maybe intensify patrols over there. And at the regional level, this connects to these coordinating structures. They usually have a hub where they can share information. In this case, I think it's the Changi, the one in Changi, the Information Fusion Center. So they have liaison centers. They have liaison officers over there, which can also sort of contribute to sort of a regional picture on where the hotspots of IU fishing and all these other maritime crimes happening. So that's one way in how I see these domestic coordinating structures contributing to improving maritime security in ASEAN, but just in this one area. So their main function is not just coordination, but also sharing information. And that's how essentially that's basically the premise of these coordinating structures. That's basically why they exist in the first place. So I hope I answered that in a satisfying way.
Thank you so much for that one, Dharma. And noting that we've got just 15 minutes left of this event, if you do have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A function and we can ask them to our panelists. So moving over to you, Kasira. So you mentioned that there's concerns from civilian agencies of a militarization and a dominance in the region. I was wondering if you could tell us how this might impact maritime security and how it's also representative of similar trends across the region.
Thank you, Kate. Right now, actually, I only have information regarding the Thai case, so I cannot say for certainty that it's definitely becoming a trend throughout Indo-Pacific. But I agree that it's always a concern. And even in in Thailand, the Navy faced backlashes when it committed to buy more weapons. So it's not only with this kind of like weaponry, but also the concerns that the taxes would be used like in a way that did not actually bring welfare to the country. So they have been a little bit of apprehensive about that. So I guess TIMEC is quite unique in the sense that it shared personnel with the Navy. So maybe it might not be that they intentionally militarize the civilian organization given the mandate. But the tension, I think, and this could maybe apply more broadly as well, is that the tension might arise between the perception of traditional security on one hand, about territorial integrity, and then you have to also, be very secure regarding with the arms, but also on the human security perceptions. So, and Ministry of Social Development and Human Security in Thailand, for example, is not on the board of directors. So this does not include them. But of course, when we ask who would be the contact point for this reach, it's going to be, TIMEC, because like Ministry of Social Development and Human Security has such a key role in victim rehabilitation from trafficking. So if the Navy, maybe join forces with TIMEC, recover some of the victims from trafficking, then have to reach out to Ministry of Social Development and Human Security. So again, between the kind of militarized culture as well, where people from there might be familiar with more like a kind of strict chain of command, which might be in contrast with a kind of civilian organization that they're trying to build that might be a little bit flatter and encourage rooms for questioning, and of course rooms that see the human security as an in itself, another means to just like protect the territorial integrity.
Thank you so much for that one, Kasira. We'll move over to you, Mimi. So we've spoken a bit about IUU fishing as well as human trafficking. I was wondering if you could tell us or give us some examples of some other non-traditional security issues that these agencies might manage in the region.
Thank you very much, Kate. Among the other non-traditional issues that are handled by the National Coast Watch Center is focusing on energy security, as what I have mentioned. The National Coast Watch Center, through its engagement with our coastal barangays and fishing communities, they have provided solar power to the fishing communities in terms of the central landing area for Lagonoy Gulf. They also provided in the Bicol Peninsula solar power for fish attracting lights and refrigerators to help the fishermen preserve their fish catch for a better price. And another area of non-traditional security is in fisheries crime, particularly in the area of monitoring IUU fishing. They also discover, like Bakamla, the smuggling of drugs, people, and contraband. So human trafficking has been on the rise in the country, and also the increase of shipside smuggling of drugs in coastal communities and barangays. Through the extensive coordination of the Philippine Coast Guard with the Department of Interior and local government that monitors the local government officials in the barangays, and also with the coordination of the Philippine National Police Maritime Group and the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources under the Department of Agriculture, the National Coast Watch Center is better able to address non-traditional security threats. The Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources also has vessels that patrol the traditional fishing grounds of the Philippines. So it falls under the Department of Agriculture, which falls under the interagency section of the council that I have discussed earlier. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you so much for that one, Mimi. So we've had a couple of questions, and please put any through the Q&A function. So firstly on Japan, and I'm going to get you to answer the Japan one, Scott, because I know you've worked on a Japan Maritime International Rules-Based Order, always with the phrases, with Trobe Asia. So firstly, from Garen, they want to know how Japanese maritime engagement efforts with ASEAN is being perceived by ASEAN countries, and also from Andrea, given Japan's increasing engagement with ASEAN countries through strategic maritime dialogues as well as cooperative initiatives, how effective is Japan's contribution to enhancing maritime security, particularly in the South China Sea?
Yeah, thank you. Really interesting questions, definitely. I think in terms of the effectiveness, I mean, I'm not a scholar of kind of Japan's interactions, but yeah, as Kay mentioned, I have been involved in some of this. And I think in terms of effectiveness, I think there's like positivity there, right? There's like really kind of promising, there's really kind of promising signs about the positivity around what Japan's delivering. I mean, for me personally, I kind of very interested in like kind of maritime security capacity building activities, and I think Japan's responsiveness in this regard, just particularly through its kind of mobile cooperation teams, where Japan sends or kind of engage in training around different areas, and kind of there's such a kind of imparting of skills and skill development that Japan delivers, particularly through the Coast Guard, and this is kind of really. This is like day-to-day stuff that people need to be able to do to kind of provide maritime security. It's things like diving skills, or like how to like restrain people and stuff like that. It's kind of like that lower level activity. But I think it's really effective because, you know, we've heard quite a bit today already about the kind of problems around human resources, right, and making sure people have the right skills, we get the right people in the right kind of positions within the coordination bodies and within the kind of law enforcement agencies as well. So I think Japan kind of strengthening that human resources element for me is one area that's really effective. I think there's kind of possibly two overarching kind of issues that I'm kind of interested in here, which reduce the effectiveness. I think sometimes there's a tendency to focus on the kind of more material forms of capacity in terms of, you know, like giving ships or giving platforms and things like that, which I think is kind of really important and does have a place. But, you know, problems of maintenance and things, and actually being able to use those kind of material forms of capacity is something that sometimes I think goes slightly under considered. And then the kind of growing problem, at least from my perspective, but other people might disagree, is that, you know, Japan's really active in this domain, which is a huge positive. But then you have so many countries that are kind of increasingly getting involved in trying to engage, particularly around maritime issues, right? I mean, Australia really active in this space at the moment. The UK, the European Union. I think just last year, I think like Czechia, the Czech Republic, announced its intentions to engage in like Coast Guard capacity building, despite being a landlocked country. So like this kind of like quite a crowded space of capacity building and quite a crowded space, and a kind of lack of coordination at the moment, which I think is kind of improving, but kind of there's still these kind of areas of overlap and confliction. So I think effective, but definitely kind of things to consider. In terms of the perceptions of how this is being received, I think perhaps everyone else will have a stronger idea on this. I mean, my kind of sense is that because of the kind of focus on the provision of some sort of good, right, the ability to kind of be more resilient in the maritime domain, a kind of lack of kind of overarching kind of political linkage, I guess, because it's not all about traditional security and stuff, that there is a kind of positive perception, but people might have more to say on that. So thank you, really good questions.
Thank you. So for our three final speakers, I'm going to throw a couple of questions at you that have been asked, and you can answer one of them or a couple of them as a kind of power round. So firstly, as discussed, if you want to talk about the perceptions of Japanese engagement, As well, we've got from Chandra here in the chat about US engagement with your state. We also have, of course, a question about the South China Sea's Code of Conduct. How important and critical is it to maintaining security in ASEAN? And then the final question from Uchina, maritime security cannot be solved by any country alone. Do you think that collaborations between regional maritime coordinating centers can be the solution to indirectly, effectively maritime security threats in the region? So we'll start with Dharma, then we'll go Mimi and Kasara on those. So pick any of those questions.
Yeah, sure. I think I'm more equipped to answer the question on US engagement with ASEAN. But I'm going to focus specifically on Indonesia because that's where my field of expertise is. Now, as far as the US is concerned, the US has been a really essential partner, so to speak, in building the maritime security institutions in Indonesia. I think just 2 years ago, the Indonesian and the United States officially opened a maritime training center in Batam, which just sort of just speaks to the level of support that the U.S. has given to building the Bakamla. And this is also not to say that this is also not putting aside the Japanese contributions in shaping the Bakamla that has been since 2008. So there's a lot of capacity building and technical assistance programs going on between Indonesia and the United States with a specific focus on the Bakamla. And there's also other projects with the US with the USAID, the on Foreign Assistance Office in terms of improving maritime conservation. So that works together with fishermen, so to improve fisheries. And I think I'm going to talk a bit about. I think I would have to agree with Uchenna there regarding how maritime security problems cannot be solved by a single country, and the regional maritime coordinating centers are that they can be a solution, and the history of maritime cooperation in Southeast Asia sort of supports that conclusion. When piracy was on the rise in 2004, it was the littoral states that sort of that spearheaded cooperation in the Malacca Strait to bring down piracy. But as far as regional coordination goes, I think it's pretty much in its infancy, because there's still a lot of trust deficits and other interoperational issues that ASEAN members face, which sort of inhibits further coordination. I think Scott wrote an article about this in 2022 about how fragmented the maritime security arrangements are in Southeast Asia. So at this point, I might yeah, I think that's for me.
Okay, for the Philippines, there is massive support from the Japanese government. Specifically, the Japan Coast Guard has been giving us aid for the vessels and also for capacity building. Our Filipino Coast Guard officers have studied at their Masters in Security Studies at the GRIPS, or the National Institute for Policy Studies in Japan. And in terms of perception, there's a highly positive perception of Filipinos with respect to the assistance given by the government of Japan and the technical cooperation agreement with Japan for our maritime law enforcement personnel. We also have a liaison officer from the Japan Coast Guard who is inside the Philippine Coast Guard headquarters. In terms of U.S. engagement with the Philippines, we are very happy with the Balikatan exercises 2024, where the U.S. Marines trained our Philippine Coast Guard and Philippine Navy officers in maritime domain awareness. And we are also excited for the outcome of the trilateral security summit between Japan and U.S. and the Philippines. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has been pushing for the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea since he became president in 2022. And also, with respect to having the regional allies for maritime security, the Philippines is seeking to widen our engagement with new allies. So we're looking at engaging more with the United Kingdom, the European Union. We have 2,000 alumni from the World Maritime University of Sweden, and we are also in the process of sending more Coast Guard officers and Navy officers to the Naval War College and the Naval Postgraduate School in the coming years due to the increased engagement. And we just had a increased maritime security cooperation with Brunei and Vietnam, and also South Korea. So we are also expanding to other new extra-regional partners. Thank you very much.
Right. I think I'll just be very brief since my panelists have done excellent jobs answering the questions already. I just want to echo Dharma's sentiment as well about the coordination, but then it needs a lot of transparency and willingness to share the information. And even in the domestic, like, condition, then it would be difficult. I mean, I'm speaking from my own country as well, that they would be really willing to share some of the sensitive information among their own domestic agencies. And of course, for the COC, it's a bit long overdue, right? I mean, ASEAN has actually prioritized this for quite some time, but then it got stalled, and of course COVID happened, and ASEAN actually has designated coordinating country with China, and sometimes for some countries that has no claims in the area, like Thailand and Singapore, the issue will come up, and Thailand has again designated table to deal with it. But it would not, I mean, it would just codify everything that has been already, legally binding, for example, in UN clause. And we have said that there might be a gap in having a document and having a country really actually following it. So, for example, some of the countries have been really adamant on, for example, principle of freedom of navigation, but did not sign the UN clause. That also happens. China might not be, agreeing to be binded by anything that it did not want to be bind since the very first place. So I think, personally, I think COC, of course, something that is nice to have so that we can refer to the same kind of document that China is actually willingly be legally binded. But it wouldn't work if we don't actually have other concurrent conditions as well, such as commitment from all the parties in peaceful settlement of dispute, less aggression, and active engagement with the parties.
Thank you so much for that one, Kasira. And thank you to everyone for joining us here today. A recording of this webinar will be available on YouTube shortly after the event. Many thanks to our 4 fantastic authors, Scott, Mimi, Kasira, as well as Dharma, for their contributions to both the paper and our panel tonight, as well as the team at YCAPS for coordinating with us on this event. Blue Security would also like to extend their thanks to the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade for their ongoing support. And to stay updated with Blue Security, you can follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, as well as sign up to our social media. Thank you so much to everyone today. Have a look at the chat as well. Jeff's just popping down some links for YCAPS, and have a fantastic night.
Thank you.